Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are officially members of the expanded BRICS bloc. The five nations join Brazil, China, India, Russia and South Africa, which was admitted to the political and economic grouping in 2010, a year after the BRIC establishment. During the three-day 15th BRICS summit in Johannesburg in August, Argentina was added to the bloc, but just recently decided to pull out. Well, for a detailed conversation on this, we're now joined by Professor Alex Heever, Chairperson of the Social Security Systems Administration and Management Studies at Wits University Prof. Good evening. Thanks for your time. How do the additions of Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran and Saudi Arabia and the UAE to BRICS impact the dynamics of the group?
Yeah, so it's difficult to tell. I mean, because the key question is, well, what's the purpose of BRICS? And I think that there can be a number of different interpretations, and certain countries may have more of an emphasis on one feature than another. But it appears that there is a role for BRICS in kind of creating a counterbalance to the West, the so-called West, as one feature of the overall program approach. But the other option, interpretation of what it should be about is development for countries that are in need of development and may feel that they are excluded from many of the conventional tools of development if they don't band together. But it's not clear that this second feature is really something that is going to practically occur, and it's not really clear from the agenda items that there is any serious effort to make that particular feature happen. So it means one's kind of left with the idea that the overall BRICS arrangement is people who kind of have a grudge against the West and want to kind of create a talking shop to kind of counterbalance it.
Well, that in itself is not a bad thing, but I'd imagine, Professor, that the demands or the needs of Ethiopia, Egypt, potentially South Africa, would be quite different to the needs of Brazil, China, or India.
Yeah, the development requirements of South Africa are very different to that of Egypt, and every country is quite context specific, and it's multilateral relationships, its way in which it achieves its objectives through engaging with all countries in the world is pretty much unique to each country. And India's interests do not coincide with those of China, and they certainly don't coincide with that of Russia. And many of these countries, their value systems don't coincide with the values that are embedded in South Africa's constitution. So it does raise questions as to what exactly is going to occur that couldn't occur by other means. And by other means, I mean that this isn't the only multilateral arrangement in town. There are many other. There are the regional groupings within Africa itself. There are other international multilateral discussions and arrangements. And in many cases, the arrangements that really make a difference are not multilateral in nature, but bilateral, and really depend on creating a sort of a win-win arrangement between two countries, each of which have unique interests. And they will both, in each of those countries, they will be playing to their own home ground. They're going to be arranging things and trying to set up things that benefit their country. And they're not trying to develop your country, they're trying to develop theirs. So you have to have a win-win for an arrangement to occur. And it's very difficult to see how that can occur with this diverse range of countries, with a wide range of interests and not always very democratic environments. Many of them are absolutely not democratic and are not good actors in the international space. It's hard to see how we can come to some sort of group arrangement with them that we wouldn't get a better deal working bilaterally.
Now, in light of the new members, Professor, how do you foresee BRICS addressing social security challenges and promoting economic development? I mean, you've talked about the diverse social and economic landscapes of all the countries, of the various new entrants, their respective needs all differing. Is this formation of these countries, and some of them are, I suppose, in reaction to the West, likely to force them to some form of compromise and more democracy than one would normally expect?
I don't think any democracy is going to emerge out of this grouping. But from a social security perspective, many of these different countries do have social security systems at different levels of sophistication. But it's important to note that South Africa is very well placed within the international discussions on social security. It's held the international social security conferences for all countries in Cape Town, and they all came to South Africa and presented on their countries. South Africa has considerable access to information and knowledge of all countries, not just these countries. And these countries were all present at that International Association conference. So the question is, what practically can this grouping do for social security? We also have a regional agreements on setting up social security arrangements, which are not really adhered to or not really taken very seriously. And it's not sure how the BRICS arrangements are going to do something that we are not doing domestically or regionally ourselves. There is an issue that all of these countries need coherent social security systems, but in the South African context, it's very, very evident that South Africa is way behind the curve on developing a coherent structural approach to social security. In the case of China, a country like that, they do practically, their social security system is continuously evolving. There might not be a democratic country, but there is an element of democracy there and an element of a social contract that is being implemented. In countries like Russia, it's unclear as to how much corruption impacts in the actual implementation of their social security systems. And in the South African context, the creation of clean governance arrangements for our social security systems is actually very pivotal. But it's not clear that many of these countries actually give a priority to that. So again, it's a question as to what we're going to learn from these different countries. There are many countries not in this grouping that have much better systems, much better governance, and are much more effective in getting results out of their systems. And I'd say out of the grouping, probably China is the best out of the grouping in getting results out of its social security system. They seem a lot more committed to actually making their systems work. But it's unclear that the other countries are that committed. So I don't know what we will learn from them.
So when we look at the economics or the GDPs of these countries, I'd imagine that Egypt, Ethiopia, and South Africa, I mean, obviously don't rate as highly as some of the bigger BRICS members. Is there a likelihood that the African nations might come together, collude, if you will, for want of a better description, to push an Africa agenda? Or is it almost each country for itself in this membership?
It's pretty much always going to be each country for itself. And if we had to look at South Africa's growth requirements, South Africa has been underperforming relative to its peer countries, its peer developing countries. They've been growing where we have been stagnant or in decline. And this is very much to do with local conditions and local policies, not to do with both international trends or things that other countries are doing to us. It's more to do with what we're doing to ourselves. So I think that South Africa's growth objectives are very much framed by its domestic policy agenda, which has been extremely poor to date. And we've certainly lost a lot of our economic growth potential in the last 10 to 15 years, which we've got to recover. But I'm not sure how a multilateral grouping like this, even within Africa, actually helps us to get out of the quagmire we're in. It's actually very straightforward in many cases. It's been identified by many bodies where our problems do lie. The question is whether there's going to be a government commitment to addressing them. But our solutions are not going to come from Egypt, and they're not going to come from any collaborative arrangement between countries. There is the possibility that different countries might collude with parts of the South African government in order to move South Africa away from democracy toward a more authoritarian regime. And if that were the case, we're certainly not going to grow, and we're certainly not going to get investment. But the question really is whether that's the purpose of being in BRICS, or whether there is actually something practical we're going to get out of it.
And that leads to my next question, Professor, because the perspective that you've given of BRICS and the various countries that have recently joined seems to be a rather gloomy one. And would then beg the question, why are these countries keen to join BRICS? What is the benefit of being a member of BRICS?
So I think that the benefit, the way it looks at the moment, is that these are all countries which are seeking to essentially achieve a degree of autonomy from the West in terms of their actions. But many of the larger economies that are doing so are ones that are they are not democratic. They are authoritarian countries and societies. They certainly don't reflect the values that we have in our constitution. So it raises the question as to whether their striving for that autonomy is largely to preserve the authoritarian structures that they have built up in those various countries, and are trying to deflect any pressure to actually modify or change in the current sort of global context. But these are not simple questions. And the idea that the West is just a virtuous system that is imposing democracy on other countries is also a massive oversimplification. The reality is that there are countries that are less authoritarian and those that are deeply authoritarian and destructive to both the globe, to their regions, and to their own peoples. And the question is really what takes us toward a world which isn't like that. I just don't see this grouping doing that, and I worry that this is really a group of people who have an agenda to kind of extricate and put a wall around their ability to continue to behave the way they are.
Final thoughts on this. Russia takes over the presidency in 2024, and President Putin mentioned a focus on enhancing foreign policy coordination among member countries. How can coordinated efforts within BRICS contribute to social security advancement and economic stability in the region? Is it likely to occur?
No, I don't see what it will have anything to do with enhancing social security at all, or human development. That doesn't appear to be the agenda of Russia at this present point in time. But what is very clearly uppermost in the mind of Russia at this point is to kind of improve its legitimacy within the global context after its illegal war with Ukraine, its invasion of Ukraine. And that is obviously very troubling to Russia because it's facing massive sanctions and it's facing a lot of countries that have isolated it. So within that context, it's got a very strong agenda to try and improve its status in the global context under the auspices of a multipolar world. Now, a multipolar world is not a bad thing, but the question is, what kind of pole do you represent? And the question is Russia the kind of pole we want in this world? And but what they appear to want to do is to kind of market themselves as actually being some kind of virtuous promoter of human development in the world, and they're obviously clearly not. But that is clearly where their agenda lies, and the question is whether that's really of any value to South Africa or to anybody else in the BRICS arrangement. I don't see what value it adds to anybody or any conversation we're having in the world today.
Professor Alex Heever, Chair, Social Security Systems Administration and Management Studies at the University of Witwatersrand.